tariffs are the talk of town at the moment. Could you give us a glimpse on what's currently happening?
So yeah, what we've seen recently by the new Trump administration imposed tariffs on all major trade partners from the US, including a base tariff of 10% on basically everything and everyone, with the exclusion for now with Mexico and Canada. But everyone else having at least an imposed customs tax or tariffs, as it's called, of 10%. For the EU, that we've seen 20%, 24 for Japan, actually. For Switzerland, it's more than 30%, by the way, interestingly to understand. And what is massive and will also, in my opinion, kick off an escalation spiral is the imposed tariffs on China, which are 54%. So that's what we've seen basically in the global markets. When it comes to stocks, the reaction was hefty with around a 5% drop in the S&P 500. Also Bitcoin, since this is a Bitcoin podcast, right? Bitcoin reacted also with more than 7%. We are like back to 75,000 euros per Bitcoin. And despite the fact one Bitcoin remains one Bitcoin. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. And obviously everyone is asking, including major players like Financial Times, is this kicking off a trade war? Yeah, up to you to decide.
And how do you see that playing out in the next couple of years? Could you give us your perspective?
Yeah, so what we already seen starting is an escalation spiral in terms of reciprocity. So the idea of Trump is to only react to unfair taxes and unfair customs and tariffs. But what actually is happening with this broad approach to say, okay, we apply tariffs on basically everything, is that you kick off an escalation spiral. So before that, for instance, it was the case that having cars imported from the EU was a bit more tariff from the US. Other way around, when it comes to importing trucks, the other way around, vice versa, it was a bit more tax. So in the end, it more or less leveled out, right? But now you have basically 20% everything coming from the EU. So national economically wise, this protectionism will massively increase the costs from buyers, from purchasers, actually purchasing power for the consumers in the US. Hence, also, especially for Germany, which is a powerhouse in exporting, will be severe in terms of there will be less exports to our major trading partner, the US. And I see that as an escalating spiral in terms of, okay, the US will react, already announced that there will be severe reactions, and they will also impose similar tariffs and or taxes, which means actually creating this reciprocity that Trump announced in his speech 2 days ago is actually kicking off an escalation spiral, which in the end, everyone will lose because global trade will be massively more expensive and hence supply chains will be delayed. Two factors in supply chains. It's not only the costs of additional 30% or for instance, 25 for Japan or 54 for Chinese goods. It is worse than that because having tariffs on basically everything will increase also the bureaucracy, right? This change will likely lead to also some paperwork shock and red tape shock. It will create uncertainty how to actually deal with it, the new rules, not only imposed by the US, but also implied from the European Union or China, for instance, because also the Chinese folks will react accordingly, right? And this is a bit unpredictable. No one can actually predict the future of that, but it certainly increases insecurity right now. And this is what we see also in the markets when it comes to the pricing. Checking out the Bitcoin ticker right now, we're back to almost 77,000 euros again. So probably the markets are really expecting that there will be too severe implications, but the dollar against the euro at least lost more than 2%, which is a decent drop in FX markets, right? You rarely see such swings on a day-to-day basis. So these are the implications that I see right.
Yeah, cool. And you could imagine that this is also doing something to trust between nation states. So do you think that this has also implications for Bitcoin, with one of its key characteristics being trustlessness?
Yes, 100%. What is these increasing tariffs? You can call it trade war if you want, but what these increasing tariffs certainly will induce is even lower trust amongst all trading partners and participants, right? So the relationship, for instance, between the US and China is already very tense. Certainly, it doesn't help bring us to the brink of a trade war and losing tension, right? The other way around, there will be decreased trust. This means also decreased trust in national currencies, and it will be harder to actually settle the remaining trade. So the trade volume will be lowered, and the remaining trade volume even will be harder to settle with a national currency, because obviously the Chinese won't trust US dollar purchases, which is nothing new. They already exchanged the majority in gold and not accepting T-bills anymore. And the other way around, the same way, right? So what this means, it will be harder and harder to actually find a trade currency, because for settlement, you certainly don't want to have the political money of your opponent. Okay, you simply don't trust the dollar or the renminbi, maybe, which makes sense on a protectionism perspective, right? And what this means is there will be an increasing demand on apolitical money and apolitical settlement layers, right? Or payment structures, call it what you want. But you need some apolitical, and which I mean an independent form of money and form of settlement required in the very near future. And this certainly plays in the hands of Bitcoin, because there's perfect decentralization in terms of there's no political party involved. You can argue there's a certain degree of centralization in Bitcoin mining and certain ecosystem players and blah, blah, blah. Okay, we can discuss that, but the protocol itself is independent and apolitical. This will certainly attract people in the need of having an apolitical settlement layer.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And could you also give us a comparison to gold? Would gold be an alternative as well?
Yeah, it is already, but more in the store of value, right? So what we see is that the Chinese are purchasing tons of gold, similar other BRICS countries, but it's harder to settle trade on with gold, right? Because it's of its costs of mobility,
Yeah.
and Bitcoin will be much easier to settle trade, a billion trade within a few minutes globally. This is much more effective.
Yeah, cool. Well, anything else that comes to mind in this context?
So from my perspective, it makes sense to say, okay, like we said in the early days, it might catch up, so it might make sense to have a share.
Yeah, most definitely. Because Bitcoin is the best and most practical and only digital solution we have at the moment, right?
Yeah, there is no better alternative,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.